For today's kitchen table session, we're going to do some mold making. We have an écorché face that was made with some oil bonded clay, and we're going to take a mold of it. Because we're stuck at home and we're doing mold making, our household items for this project are going to be cornstarch, Dawn detergent, and silicone caulking. The important thing about the caulking is it has to be 100% silicone, and it has to be clear, and it has to be type 1. The project that we're taking a mold of was made with an oil-based clay that has sulfur in it, and because we're using silicone, we need to first seal it with something so that the silicone caulking doesn't actually come in contact with the clay, because the sulfur will react with the silicone and it won't ever set up. You can use paint, you can use lacquer, just something that sprays it on that doesn't get rid of the detail, but puts a barrier between the oil-based clay and the silicone. I have a sprayable lacquer that was sitting around for a while, and I'm going to use that for my project. The Dawn detergent should be added to water and mixed up. Add the detergent to the water so you don't get a lot of foam and bubbles, but then make sure that it dissolves. And all that this is going to be a release agent from the caulking in your fingers, so that way it doesn't get stuck on you. The first layer of our silicone is going to be very thin, and we're going to concentrate on the detail of the work. We're going to get a nice even coating over the whole thing, and we're going to be very careful not to go any thicker than 1/4 of an inch. The caulking, or the silicone, reacts with the moisture in the air, and that's what allows it to set up and become firm. And if we go thicker than 1/4 of an inch, then we start to eliminate the possibility of the center curing. So be careful not to go any thicker than that. Later, for our second layers, we can add cornstarch into the caulking. And this will allow us to cast it or set it up as thick as we want it to be, because we'll aerate it with the cornstarch. The mixture, you can go all the way up to 50% cornstarch and caulking, but I wouldn't go any more than that. Be aware also that if you add cornstarch into the silicone caulking, it sets up faster and it's not quite as flexible. It's a firmer material. So let's put our first detail layer on, also known as the paint layer. There's a couple ways you can do this. As long as your fingers are coated with the Dawn detergent, it won't stick to you, and you can get some out onto your fingers and move the material around by pressing it into place. When you do this, make sure that you're eliminating air bubbles on the surface of your material or of your object. That way those air bubbles don't become positive bumps on your finished project. If it starts to stick to you, just make sure you get a little bit more Dawn detergent solution on your finger and keep going. You can also apply the material directly to the mold and then move it around, whichever is easier for your practice. Again, just be very careful not to go thicker than 1/4 of an inch if you don't have the cornstarch additive. All right, we have our detail layer down, which is probably about 1/8 of an inch in most places. And I've gone around and made sure that I've covered everything. I don't have any holes that go all the way through. One nice thing about the silicone caulking is that it's clear, so it's very easy to see how thick your material is, where you may need to add more, if you have any bubbles on the surface that you need to deal with. It's a really easy material. There are some drawbacks. One is that if you are using this with the intent of casting foundry wax into it, There is an ammonia in the caulking, and it will indefinitely affect your wax so that the wax is softer. So if you like to work with a firm wax, casting it into this product may not be the best solution. Also, its tear strength is not that great. It's pretty easy to tear the silicone caulking after it sets up. In this product, I am going to find a spot that I'm going to cut all the way through, and that'll be the seam that allows me to open it up. Where the cut ends, I'm going to embed a piece of cloth, just a little rag, so that way as I pull it apart, that tear doesn't continuously spread. The cloth will act as a barrier or a stop so that it can't keep tearing. It's also, if you're going to cast resins into it, it will last for a while, but it starts to degrade after a little bit. Here's our detail layer where we've pressed the silicone caulking, roughly 1/8 to 1/4 inch thick, and covered the entire surface. Alright, so we're going to start adding some more material. Make sure again that your hands are coated in the Dawn detergent solution. And right here is where I'm going to put the end of our seam, which means that I want to embed a little bit of fabric right there so that that seam doesn't continue to tear. And this time I'm going to apply directly to the model and move all the caulking around, just paying attention to be sure not to go more than 1/4 inch thick. Otherwise it won't set up unless you add cornstarch to it. Another thing that you can do with this caulking method is to add painter's acrylic paint into the mix. It colors it, so if you have a multiple layer project, you can see where you've been a little bit easier than you can if it's just clear. And also, it helps it to set up thicker. You don't have to maintain the 1/4 inch rule quite so severely. So all we're going to do now is make sure that we have a minimum of, I'd say anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch thickness around the whole thing, and we'll take it from there. Once this sets up, I'm going to do one final step for the mold, which is to thicken the portion where we're going to have our cut. And I'm going to start the cut right down here, up, and then follow along the jawline all the way to the other side, ending where we have our fabric embedded. That will be a good opening for this whole thing to come out. So we'll show you that in the next clip. Since we're making do with what we have in the kitchen table sessions, we are going to make a mother mold out of mortar. Other possible things you might have around your garage or in your house would be fiberglass resin. That's a great one. Plaster would work just fine. Cement would probably work. You could make plastics out of plastic bags if you do a little homework and make sure that you are being safe about it with off-gassing. Heat up oil to about 230 degrees and slowly stir in plastic bags until they are like taffy, and you can press them together and you get a really nice mother mold out of that. Also do a little bit of homework and you can make plastic with styrofoam and acetone. But again, make sure that you're in a ventilated area and that you do your own homework to make sure that you are safe about it. For us though, we built ourselves a little box and our mold is in here, and we are going to mix up mortar so that it's not too runny. That way I can control where the undercuts are and where the mold lines will be. So let's get going. We have the first part of our mother mold finished. It sat overnight for about 8 hours for the mortar to set, and we have mold release on there, and we are going to now put in the second part of our mother mold. All right, we have our mother mold, and it's time to cut out our guy here.
I don't see Dada's name. Yeah. But there's some plate on here.
Yeah.
Oh, she head.
Mm-hmm.
Why she head come off? Why did she head come off?
Okay, hang on. So now we have our mold, and the next step is to clean it up, put it back into our mother mold, and cast something into it. So to recap, silicone caulking, it's a great
I have a ball.
resource for being stuck at home. It's not a professional material. It won't last quite as long, but it does a really good job for what we need. All right, enjoy.